I thought I was leaving my 8-year-old, innocent daughter in safe hands, the hands of my own mother and sister. It was just 1 week away for work, and I trusted them completely. But 3 days later, I received a phone call that shattered my world. Sophie had fallen from the roof. What happened to her wasn't an accident. It was something far more deliberate, far more cruel. And when I uncovered the truth, I was stunned. The truth was so dangerous, so horrifying, that my body began to tremble with fear. My name is Emma, and I'm 41 years old. I live in a quiet suburb of Brookshire, a historic American town that holds the kind of charm people write about in novels. Mornings here are calm and gentle, just the way I like them. On most days, I wake up early, not because I have to, but because I enjoy the stillness before the world starts moving. As the morning sun filtered through the large windows of my modest but well-kept apartment, I stood in the kitchen pouring myself a cup of coffee, the aroma warm and familiar. The latest issue of Medical Science today lay open on the counter. I wasn't reading for work. I just liked to stay current. My daughter, Sophie, was at the dining table in the living room, her small fingers curled around a pencil as she frowned at her math homework. "Mom, I can't solve this problem," she said, her voice soft but frustrated. I walked over, coffee in hand, and sat beside her. Sophie had her father's chestnut hair and my green eyes. At just 8 years old, she was sharp, thoughtful, and full of questions. "Let's see," I said, glancing over her shoulder. Though I'd spent years handling complex tasks in my career, teaching fractions to an 8-year-old often felt like the harder job. A few careful words later, Sophie's face lit up with understanding.
Oh,
"That's how it works," she said, beginning to write confidently. I smiled and gently brushed my fingers through her hair. "That's right. Well done." Moments like this made me forget everything else. For a while it was just me and Sophie. And that was enough. It was a Saturday morning, and while Sophie finished the last of her homework, I reminded her that we were having lunch with family that day. "Grandma and Aunt Rebecca are coming today, right?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. There was a slight hesitation, something I didn't miss. "Yes," I replied, setting my cup down. "Grandma, Aunt Rebecca, and Leo too. We're all having lunch together." Sophie gave a small nod and returned to her workbook without another word. I paused, wondering what she was feeling, but I didn't press her. Family relationships had always been complicated. On the surface, we kept things polite, even friendly, but beneath that, old scars lingered. My mother, Linda, had spent most of her life maintaining her image in our community. After my father passed away, she invested his insurance money wisely and lived comfortably in an aging but elegant house in Brookshire. She volunteered at church and participated in charity events. To outsiders, she was graceful and generous. To me, she was someone who rarely showed warmth unless it benefited her. "Emma's always so busy with her fancy career," she would say to her neighbors with a half smile, as if success were a flaw. She had once dreamed of becoming a medical researcher herself, but gave it all up when she got married. Watching me succeed in the field she left behind only fueled a quiet resentment that she masked behind shallow praise. Then there was my sister, Rebecca. Bold, flashy, and always seeking attention, she worked at a local real estate agency and raised her son Leo as a single mother. Rebecca had been through a difficult divorce, and though she acted cheerful around others, she often carried bitterness just below the surface. She couldn't hide her envy every time I was promoted or awarded a research grant. "Emma's always been the perfect one," she'd say in front of others, but her eyes would narrow whenever I entered the room. Her son Leo, however, was kind and unusually thoughtful for a 10-year-old. He and Sophie got along well, one of the few genuine bonds in the family. As I checked the time and packed Sophie's bag, she suddenly asked, "Mom, are we coming back home early?" I smiled and nodded. "Of course. Just lunch and then we're back. Remember, I'm leaving on that business trip tomorrow, so today is our time." I gave her hand a gentle squeeze, trying to reassure both of us. I was scheduled to leave for a week-long medical research conference in Switzerland, an important opportunity one couldn't afford to miss. Sophie would be staying with my mother and sister while I was away. Everything was arranged. Or so I thought. The next morning was full of preparation. I double-checked Sophie's medications, packed her allergy-safe snacks, and labeled everything clearly. Her suitcase was small but organized, and I placed it near the door with a sigh that felt heavier than expected. Sophie lingered near the hallway, quiet and distracted, her usual chatter replaced with short, uncertain glances. As we drove toward my mother's house, Sophie kept staring out the window. When we arrived, Linda was already waiting at the door with her signature red lipstick and a silk scarf draped around her neck, as if she were off to a garden party. Rebecca arrived shortly after, wearing bold makeup and loud jewelry, her voice too cheerful. "There's our little Sophie," she said, giving her a dramatic hug. Sophie barely responded. Before I left, I crouched down in front of my daughter. "Hey, you're going to be just fine. Grandma and Aunt Rebecca are here, and Leo will be around too." Sophie looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw real hesitation in her eyes. "Mom, do you really have to go?" she whispered. My heart squeezed. She'd stayed here before without issue, but something about today felt different. I held her close. "It's only 1 week. I'll call you every day, okay?" She nodded slowly, but her arms clung to me for a second longer than usual. I kissed her forehead and stood up, forcing myself to leave. At the airport boarding gate, I called my mother one last time. "Just reminding you, Sophie's dinner is in the bottom shelf of the fridge. She has to take her medication before bed, and you know about her allergy to peanuts." Linda's sigh was audible. "Emma, how many times do I need to hear this? I raised you. I can certainly take care of my granddaughter." "I know, Mom. I just worry." "Well, don't. Focus on your important conference," she replied, her tone flat. After the call ended, a dull ache settled in my chest. The image of Sophie's anxious face wouldn't leave my mind. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the final boarding call for Flight 324 to Zurich." The announcement echoed through the terminal. I glanced back toward the terminal windows one last time, then walked toward the gate, each step feeling heavier than the last. I reminded myself, again and again, that Sophie would be okay. They were her family. She'd be safe. I believed that. At least I wanted to. 3 days into the conference, I was sitting on the edge of my hotel bed in Zurich, shoulders stiff from hours of back-to-back sessions with global researchers. It was nearly 2 a.m., but I hadn't been able to sleep. The window offered a beautiful view of the quiet Swiss city, but I barely noticed it. Something had felt off since the moment I arrived. Sophie usually sent me little voice notes through my mom's phone, or Linda would at least forward a picture or two, but this time, there had been nothing. No updates. No check-ins. Just silence. I picked up my phone again, checked the screen, and sighed. No messages. No calls. I told myself they were probably just busy, that Leo was keeping Sophie occupied. I took a quick shower, hoping it would help me sleep. But as I lay down under the crisp hotel sheets, a sharp ring broke the silence. The room phone. My heart stopped. "Hello." I answered, voice dry. "Is this Miss Emma?" A calm but serious male voice replied. "This is Officer Johnson from Brookshire General Hospital." I sat up instantly, already trembling. Yes, this is Emma. "Your daughter, Sophie Warner, has been brought into our emergency room. She's in critical condition." His words shattered the air around me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. What happened? I could barely speak. "She sustained a serious fall from a rooftop. She has had trauma, multiple fractures, and internal injuries. She's unconscious. We're preparing for emergency surgery." I couldn't even register what he was saying. No, she was with my mother and sister. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a rooftop. What are you talking about? "I understand, ma'am. The paramedics were dispatched after a call from your family, but she was already in critical condition when she arrived." "I'm very sorry." My body went cold. As soon as I hung up, my fingers trembled so much I could barely type. I tried calling my mother's number 3 times before it finally connected. "Hello." Linda answered, her voice groggy.
"Mom."
"What happened to Sophie?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. There was a pause, then, shockingly, she laughed. I don't know. She must have gone off on her own. That child never listens lately. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She's in the hospital. She's unconscious. They said she fell from the roof. Oh, that's terrible, Linda replied flatly. I'll ask Rebecca. A few seconds later, Rebecca's voice came through. What's going on, Emma? What happened to my daughter? I demanded. Rebecca let out a sigh. She wasn't listening. I turned my back for a minute, and she must have climbed up there. It's not her fault. Not their fault. My daughter was fighting for her life, and they spoke as if it were a minor inconvenience. My hands clenched around the phone. Get to the hospital, now, I said through gritted teeth. I'm getting the next flight back. Fine, fine. Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca muttered before ending the call. I stood there for a moment, staring at the silent phone in disbelief, then snapped into action. I called the hotel front desk and asked for the earliest flight to Brookshire. As I threw my clothes back into the suitcase with shaking hands, I kept hearing Sophie's voice in my head. Mom, do you really have to go? And now all I could whisper was, please, baby, please hold on. 12 hours later, I stood outside the intensive care unit at Brookshire General Hospital, barely able to keep myself upright. My legs were trembling, my eyes swollen from crying, and my body felt like it had been dragged through a hurricane. After 2 back-to-back flights and a frantic rush from the airport, I had finally arrived. But nothing could prepare me for what I was about to see. A doctor in navy scrubs met me at the ICU door. Miss Emma? He asked gently. Yes, I whispered, my voice nearly gone. I'm Dr. Patel. Your daughter is stable for now, but she sustained serious injuries. She has a severe concussion, 3 fractured ribs, a broken left arm, and some internal bruising. She's not conscious yet, but we're monitoring her closely. My knees nearly buckled. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Is she going to wake up? She's young and strong. There are signs of response, but it may take time. I nodded weakly, and he guided me to the door. As I stepped inside, the air turned still. My breath caught as I saw her. Sophie looked impossibly small on the wide white hospital bed, surrounded by machines and 4 stands. Her face was bruised and pale, wrapped in bandages. Her left arm was suspended in a sling, and tiny tubes ran from her nose, her wrist, and her chest to nearby monitors. The soft, steady beeping was the only sound that told me she was still here, still fighting. I walked slowly to her side and sank into the chair beside her. My hands trembled as I reached for her right hand, the only one not covered or broken. It felt cold. I'm here, sweetheart, I whispered, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. Mommy's here. You're safe now, I promise. The door creaked open behind me. I turned and froze. Linda and Rebecca stood there, Linda in full makeup, dressed like she was on her way to a luncheon, and Rebecca in a bright red blouse with gold earrings. Neither of them looked like someone who had just nearly lost a child in their care. Oh, so you did make it, Linda said coolly, folding her arms. There's no need to be dramatic, Rebecca added, glancing briefly at Sophie before looking away. I stood, my hands clenched at my sides. What exactly happened? I asked, my voice low but full of steel. Tell me, right now. They exchanged glances. She climbed onto the roof on her own, Rebecca said with a shrug. By the time we noticed, it was too late. My heart pounded with fury. Sophie was careful always. She never climbed anything without asking. And their casual tone, the lack of urgency, the way they showed up like this wasn't a crisis, something was very wrong. I want both of you out of this room, I said coldly. You're not welcome here until you're ready to tell the truth. Linda's mouth tightened. Rebecca rolled her eyes. But neither argued. They turned and walked out. I sat back down and held Sophie's hand again. I didn't know what had really happened yet, but one thing was now crystal clear. I couldn't trust them anymore. And whatever they were hiding, I would find it. That evening, I sat in the dimly lit hospital cafeteria, cradling a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in both hands. I had barely eaten in 2 days, and the constant hum of machines, footsteps, and my own thoughts had worn me down to the bone. Every few hours, I would go check on Sophie, speak with the nurses, sit by her bed, and whisper to her, begging her to wake up. I was just about to get up when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Emma. I turned and froze. It was Alex. He stood at the entrance in full military uniform, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His face was tight with exhaustion, his short brown hair slightly damp from the spring rain outside. But in his blue eyes, I saw exactly what I needed most: determination. "You came," I whispered, stunned. "I got on the first flight I could after they told me," he said, pulling me into a hug. For the first time in days, I let myself lean on someone. We sat down at a corner table, and I quickly brought him up to speed. The hospital's report, Sophie's injuries, and most importantly, the cold and unnatural responses from Linda and Rebecca. I told him how they claimed Sophie had climbed the roof on her own, but their behavior told a different story. Alex's jaw tightened as he listened. "That doesn't sound like Sophie at all. She's careful, thoughtful. She wouldn't go climbing a roof without telling anyone." "I know," I said. "I think they're hiding something." "Then it's time to stop treating this like an accident," he said. "We need the police involved." I nodded slowly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Alex pulled out his phone and stepped outside to make a call. 20 minutes later, he returned with a calm but serious man in plain clothes. "Emma, this is Officer Grant. We served together years ago. He's with Brookshire PD now and agreed to come speak with us." Officer Grant greeted me respectfully and asked to hear everything from the beginning. I repeated what I knew. Sophie had been in my mother and sister's care. No updates were sent. Then the hospital called with news of a rooftop fall and critical injuries. When I called them, both women acted annoyed, not panicked. They offered no explanation, no apology. Grant listened carefully. "We've had incidents like this before," he said. "Family neglect that's brushed off as an accident. Do you know if anyone else saw or heard what happened?" I thought for a moment, then my eyes widened. "Maybe. Leo, Rebecca's son. He and Sophie are close. He was there that day." Grant nodded. "I'll contact Child Protective Services and the school counselor. If he said anything, we'll find it." Alex placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Whatever the truth is, we're going to face it together." As I looked into his eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began: hope. 2 hours later, we were escorted into a small conference room inside the hospital. The air was tense and still, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above us. Seated at the table was Leo, Rebecca's 10-year-old son. He looked smaller than I remembered, his posture slouched, hands clenched tightly in his lap, his eyes red from crying. Beside him sat a representative from Child Protective Services and a court-appointed child advocate attorney. I sat across from him with Alex by my side. Officer Grant stood quietly near the door. I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle. "Leo, sweetheart, we just want to understand what happened. You don't have to be afraid. You're safe here." Leo's eyes flicked up at me, then quickly back to the table. His lip trembled. "Mom was always kind of mean to Sophie," he began, barely louder than a whisper. "Grandma, too. They'd say things when she wasn't around. Like, 'That girl thinks she's better than us.' Or, 'Let's teach her some manners.'" My throat tightened. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What happened that day?" I asked. "The day Sophie got hurt." Leo looked down at his shoes, struggling to find the words. "There were leaves stuck in the roof gutters. Grandma was mad because water spilled out near the front door. Mom said Sophie should clean it." He hesitated, then added, "I told them I'd do it, but Mom said, no. Let Sophie do it. Maybe then she'll learn not to act like she owns the place." I gasped softly. Alex clenched his jaw beside me. Leo's voice broke as he continued. "Sophie didn't want to. She was scared. But they yelled at her. Grandma said if she didn't listen, they'd take away her food for the night. So she went out back and started climbing the ladder. I followed her. I didn't want her to be alone." He paused and wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. She was almost at the top, and then she slipped. I tried to grab her foot, but I couldn't reach her. She hit the ground so hard. She wasn't moving. The room was completely silent. Leo began to cry full-body sobs. I screamed and screamed. Mom came out. She started crying, but Grandma told her to shut up. She said it wasn't our fault. She said we'll just say Sophie climbed up there on her own. Then they waited before calling the ambulance. Officer Grant stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. You did the right thing, Leo. None of this is your fault. I couldn't speak. My hands trembled in my lap. Everything I had feared, every suspicion, was true. My own mother and sister had endangered my daughter and delayed help, all because of bitterness and jealousy. Officer Grant turned to me and Alex. We have more than enough to make an arrest. That evening, I stood just outside Sophie's hospital room, speaking with her primary doctor about her vitals, when the elevator doors down the hallway slid open with a low chime. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, followed by Officer Grant. Behind them, walking stiffly in heels and bright lipstick, was Linda, her expression confused but defensive. Rebecca trailed behind her, clutching her purse tightly, eyes wide with panic. They hadn't seen me yet. As they neared the ICU entrance, Grant raised his hand. Linda Hayes and Rebecca Turner? Linda straightened, her voice instantly sharp. Yes. What's this about? You are under arrest for child endangerment, abuse, and willful delay in providing medical assistance to a minor. The words echoed down the corridor. A nurse stopped in her tracks. A visitor at the far end of the hall turned to stare. Rebecca gasped, stumbling back. No, this is a mistake. We didn't hurt anyone. Linda's mouth twitched. Emma, tell them. This is a misunderstanding. We were just trying to teach Sophie some responsibility. I stepped forward, and for the first time in days, I didn't tremble. My voice was calm. Cold. She's 8 years old, and you forced her onto a roof. Then let her bleed on the ground while you decided whether or not to call an ambulance. She told you that? Linda asked, suddenly pale. I looked her straight in the eyes. Yes. Sophie woke up and told me everything. That was a lie. Sophie was still unconscious. But it was enough. Linda's expression shattered. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Rebecca froze completely. The officers stepped in, reading them their rights. Handcuffs clicked into place. Rebecca burst into tears. Please, Leo's lying. He doesn't know what he saw. I didn't say a word. As the officers escorted them away, Alex came to stand beside me. His presence was steady, grounding. They're going to face real consequences now, he said quietly. I don't care what happens to them anymore. I replied, my voice steady. All I care about is Sophie. I turned back to the ICU door and walked inside. The beeping of the machines greeted me again. I took Sophie's small hand in mine and whispered, They're gone now, baby. You're safe. I'm right here. 3 weeks later, the grand courtroom of the Brookshire County Courthouse was filled with reporters, spectators, and legal teams. The trial of Linda Hayes and Rebecca Turner had become a local sensation, 2 women from a well-known family now accused of intentionally harming an 8-year-old child. I sat in the front row beside Alex, my posture stiff but unwavering. My palms were cold, but my resolve was firm. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for justice for Sophie. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Victoria Reed, a focused, sharp-witted woman known for her relentless pursuit of justice in child abuse cases. She stood before the jury and began her closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, pacing slowly, her voice clear and steady, this is not a story of a simple accident. This is a case of deliberate cruelty, envy, and willful neglect by 2 family members who are entrusted with the care of a child. Instead of protecting her, they punished her. Instead of helping her after she was injured, they hesitated. And all because of petty jealousy and resentment. Behind the prosecution table, photos of the accident scene were displayed. Images of the steep roof where Sophie had been forced to climb, the bruises on her tiny body, and the medical timeline that showed a 30-minute delay in emergency response. Then came the centerpiece, the recorded testimony of Leo, played for the courtroom. The jury listened in silence as a soft, trembling voice described what had happened that day, the threats, the fear, the fall, and the cover-up. I kept my eyes forward, holding my breath. The defense tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, that Sophie had climbed the roof on her own, that the women panicked and delayed calling for help out of shock. But their arguments crumbled in the face of hard evidence and Leo's brave honesty. On the final day, the judge, a stern, gray-haired man with a no-nonsense tone, read the verdict. Linda Hayes, you've been found guilty of child endangerment, neglect, and obstruction of emergency care. You are hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison and ordered to pay $300,000 in damages to the victim's family. You will also be prohibited from unsupervised contact with any minors for the rest of your life. Linda's face turned white. Her carefully maintained poise collapsed in an instant. She opened her mouth to speak, but the judge moved on. Rebecca Turner, you have been found guilty of child abuse, coercion of a minor, and conspiracy to obstruct emergency assistance. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison, and your parental rights to Leo Turner are terminated permanently. You will not be permitted any form of contact unless authorized by the court and the child's guardian. Rebecca let out a broken sob, clutching the defense table, her mascara running down her face. I remained still. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply breathed. Outside the courthouse, reporters called out to me, microphones flashing. Emma, any comments on today's sentencing? I stopped for a moment, then looked into the cameras. My only focus now is my daughter's recovery. Justice has been served. We have nothing more to say. Alex wrapped his arm around my shoulder. We walked away from the crowd, not with celebration, but with quiet strength. The people who had hurt Sophie were now behind bars. The law had done its job. 2 months after the trial, spring returned to Brookshire with soft breezes and blooming trees. Sophie had been transferred from the ICU to a private rehabilitation ward, where she now practiced gentle physical therapy 3 times a week. Her left arm had healed in a cast, the bruises on her ribs had faded, and though she still needed help walking long distances, her determination amazed every doctor who worked with her. Emotionally, the road was harder. Sophie didn't talk much about what happened. When she did, it was in fragments, mentioning how Grandma yelled a lot or how Aunt Rebecca always looked mad. Her therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Hayes, no relation, worked with her through play and art, helping her slowly regain trust and security. She never asked to see Linda or Rebecca. She never spoke their names. I moved out of my old apartment and into a small but cozy 2-story house on a quiet street just 10 minutes from the hospital. Alex had officially transferred to a military base nearby and was now living in a guest suite on the 2nd floor. We hadn't defined what we were again, divorced, reconnected, something in between, but we co-parented like a team. Robert, Alex's father and a retired judge, visited frequently, bringing books, stories, and gentle wisdom that Sophie looked forward to. One afternoon, Sophie sat on the porch in her wheelchair, flipping through a library book, when she looked up at me and asked, "Mom, can I go back to school next week?" I knelt beside her and smoothed her hair. "We'll ask your doctor, sweetheart. If he says it's okay, then yes." She grinned, and for a moment, I saw the old Sophie, the one who asked questions during math homework and made pancakes with me on Sunday mornings. "Can Leo visit?" she asked next, a little more cautiously. "Of course," Alex replied from behind her. "We'll talk to his social worker and make sure it's soon." Leo had been placed in a loving foster home with weekly counseling sessions. Alex and I were helping cover his therapy costs and had arranged supervised visits twice a month. He was healing in his own way, slowly, quietly. Their cousin bond had survived everything. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Alex handed me an envelope. "It's from your mother," he said simply. I opened it. The letter was brief. Linda was requesting help with her legal bills and claimed the conditions in prison were unbearable for someone of her age. Rebecca had apparently lost her housing and was struggling to find steady work. The tone was familiar, guilt-laced manipulation dressed up as vulnerability. I folded the letter and set it aside. "What are you going to do?" Alex asked. I looked toward Sophie's room, where the nightlight glowed gently through the cracked door. "Nothing," I said quietly. "Not until Sophie says she's ready to forgive them. And maybe that day will never come." Alex nodded. "That's a wise choice." We sat by the fireplace, the warmth washing over us as a quiet calm settled in. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't fighting, fleeing, or fearing. I was simply present, in a home that was safe, with a child who was healing, and a future that felt open. Outside, the trees rustled in the wind. Sophie's laughter from earlier echoed in my mind. A long road still lay ahead, but one thing was finally true. We were free. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart or made you think, please like the video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful content. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. See you in the next video.